For testing today, we'll be going through all procedures for a full arterial study, meeting the requirements for CPT code 93923. The PADnet device is most commonly used to record two kinds of measurements: systolic blood pressures and pulse volume recordings, or PVRs for short. For a typical 93923 test, you will record blood pressures at the arms and ankles to calculate an ankle brachial index, or ABI, along with PVRs at the thighs, calves, and ankles. Today, we will be going through each of these, along with some additional blood pressure measurements that can be measured at the thighs and calves, and both blood pressure and PVR measurements for the toes. To begin, make sure your PADnet device and laptop are both powered on. If the laptop is connected to the PADnet network, you should be able to access the testing application, padnet.mobi, either through the desktop shortcut or through any web browser. Next, if the PADnet device is connected to your practice's internet, which can be set up via the Testing Application Settings menu, then you should be able to log in and access scheduled tests. To prepare for testing, your patient should avoid any alcohol, caffeine, or nicotine for at least 30 minutes prior to testing. They should also come in loose, comfortable clothing that exposes their limbs. When on site, have them rest lying down flat for at least 5 minutes prior to taking measurements. While they rest, you may wrap the PADnet cuffs around their upper arms, thighs, calves, and ankles. We also recommend keeping the toes warm with socks or a blanket to maintain good circulation for toe pressures. The cuffs should be wrapped tight enough that you cannot easily insert 2 fingers between the cuff and skin, and they should always be placed directly on skin, never being put over clothing. Finally, double-check that the Biomedics logo on the cuffs is facing outwards and that nothing is cutting off circulation to the cuff hoses. Since the default first measurement is blood pressure for the right arm, you should connect the PADnet device to the right cuff hose and place the sensor clip on the middle or index finger of the right hand. For the remainder of this video, we will be using the sensor clip for blood pressure readings, but a PPG probe can be interchangeably used as well. The sensor itself should be covered by the pad of the finger and placed flat against the skin. When the patient is sufficiently rested and all cuffs are secured, you may begin testing by selecting your patient's abbreviated name from the scheduled tests list, waiting for the system to zero or calibrate, and choosing the right arm blood pressure option. On the page for this segment, you will see a maximum pressure option, a graph for pressure measurements, and a start button. If the patient has a history of hypertension, you may want to increase the maximum pressure by sliding the blue pressure bar to 200 or 210. If your cuff and sensor are both set up for this segment, you may hit the start button and the device will begin to inflate the cuff. A typical pulse measurement will briefly start with more fluctuating waves, and as circulation is cut off, those waves will dampen and eventually stop. After several more seconds, you should eventually see a consistent, steady pulse return, and when it does, you should hit capture pressure and then stop. Before you move to the next segment, you must choose a point on the graph for your first pressure measurement. This point should be the peak of the first return of signal, or in other words, the small first bump measured after losing circulation that is part of an identifiable pulse pattern. If this peak isn't visible after hitting stop, you may hit the previous or next increment options to locate it. If the measurements didn't follow the circulatory pattern or seem otherwise inaccurate, you may click the Redo Test button to try again. And finally, if you cannot achieve a true flat line, often as a result of hypertension, you should check the manual box and input 201 or any value over 200. This informs the software that the patient's arteries are considered non-compressible and in turn undiagnosable. Hitting Next Segment will move you to your next measurement, which is typically the blood pressure for the left arm. Accordingly, you should move your hose connection to the left arm cuff and the sensor to the left hand. You may then repeat the measurement process. After selecting your first peak, take note of the pressure number above the graph. If the pressure for the left arm is 20 or more units different than the right arm's, you should remeasure both arms, as these results are likely inaccurate. Next, you'll be measuring PVRs for the thighs. As with any segment, you'll move the extension hose to that segment's cuff, hit the start button, and wait for inflation. Note that the sensor is not required for PVRs on the legs. You will soon see a set of waves appearing, and after a few moments, when you have a set of waves that are identical in height and shape, you can hit stop. To save a good PVR measurement, make sure you select an increment with consistent waveforms and adjust the gain so that the top and bottom of the waves are clearly visible. It's important to note that if you adjust the gain for one side's PVR, the gain for that segment on the other side should be adjusted as well. PVR measurements for the calves and ankles will be recorded in the same fashion with their respective cuffs. Any blood pressure measurements for the thighs, calves, or ankles will be recorded in the same fashion as the arms, except that the sensor should be placed on the respective side's big toe instead of the finger. So for the right calf's blood pressure, for example, the sensor should be placed on the right foot's big toe. If the pressure reading for either ankle is higher than what was measured for the arms, you should remeasure the arm pressures once to confirm these results. In many cases, the patient may not be fully rested or may be nervous for the first couple measurements, leading to a deceptively low ABI. In some cases, particularly among diabetic patients, the vessels in the ankles may also be non-compressible due to calcification, leading to a deceptively low blood pressure reading, and in turn, an ABI above 1.4, which is considered undiagnosable. Toe blood pressures are used to calculate TBIs, or toe brachial indices. To take a toe's blood pressure, wrap the PADnet's toe cuff around the base of a patient's big toe and place the sensor clip on the end. If the toe is too short to support both of these, the sensor may be removed from the clip or Velcro and placed inside of the inflatable toe cuff. Like other PVRs, toe PVRs can be measured with just the inflatable cuff. No sensor is necessary. When all scheduled segments have been completed, you'll be redirected to the segment list where you may complete the test. The next page will list your completed segments and give you the option to include any notes or images for the final report. Before removing your patient's cuffs, be sure to save your test. You may sign the test at your convenience on the scheduling site under the Unsubmitted tab.